Boris Onischenko. He was a Soviet athlete competing in the Olympics in 1976 in the sport of fencing. He was a nefarious schemer who had won silver at the 1972 Olympics. But that clearly wasn't good enough, leading to him launching a plan worthy of the most over-the-top cartoon villains. His fellow fencers couldn't help but notice that whenever they faced Boris, he would be credited with points despite seemingly never actually making contact. He had rigged a scoring machine with a sort of electronic trigger. Whenever he decided he wanted to score a point, he'd simply hit the trigger and be credited with a point despite coming nowhere near actually touching his opponent. Eventually people caught on and he was disqualified. David Robertson. During the qualifying round of the 1985 Open, the Scottish golfer employed what amounts to little more than the old foot wedge to give himself a better chance. What would happen is that he would hit an approach shot onto the green, and then just about sprint up there before his playing partner or anyone else had a chance to arrive on the scene and see where his shot had settled. He would pretend to mark his ball so that he could clean it, but he never actually marked it at all. Instead, he simply picked up the ball, acted like he was cleaning it, and then placed it closer to the pin before anyone realized what was happening. He tried this move 5 times before someone finally discovered the blatant cheating and disqualified him. Danny Almonte. Back in 2001, America got swept up by a youth baseball sensation named Danny Almonte. He was a pitcher for a team from New York, and was virtually unhittable. In fact, he actually threw a perfect game during the Little League World Series. He became the talk of every sports page and highlight show across the country, a bona fide superstar for that magical summer. And then, it was discovered that maybe he and his family hadn't been entirely truthful about a thing or two, specifically, his age. See, there's a reason Almonte was able to so thoroughly dominate his competition. He was actually 14 years old, a full 2 years older than any other player competing at the Little League World Series. Suddenly people looked at him from an entirely new perspective. This was no longer a promising young talent with Major League Baseball stardom written all over him. His fastball wasn't quite as impressive, with the revelation that he was more physically mature than the average 12-year-old, and he was followed by a cloud of shame for the next decade. Diego Maradona. Diego Maradona is one of the most famous soccer players in the history of the game, and he enjoyed a tremendous playing career as arguably the best player to ever come out of Argentina. Later, he saw some success as a coach, including guiding the Argentinian national club in the World Cup. However, what he is almost certainly the most famous for is an act that he claims was divine intervention and has become simply known as the Hand of God. The incident took place in the 1986 World Cup, when Maradona helped Argentina defeat England 2-1. The victory both eliminated England from the World Cup and kept Argentina alive, and they would eventually go on to capture the crown. Sylvester Carmouche. It seems like it would be awfully difficult to cheat in a horse race, considering the horses don't actually know what cheating means. But Sylvester Carmouche pulled it off, at least until people realized how odd it was for a horse to make up so much ground without anyone, including the other jockeys, even noticing him. This hilariously short-sighted solution by Carmouche happened a little over 20 years ago at a track in Louisiana. In front of only a smattering of fans and amidst a thick fog that covered most of the track and the infield. Riding a 23-1 long shot, suspicion was immediately aroused when it was pointed out that his horse had no mud spatters and was breathing easily. What is believed to have happened is that after the start of the race, Carmouche took his horse through the middle of the infield, waited for a few moments, and then popped out on the other side. Racing to victory. Carmouche continued to deny cheating despite all evidence to the contrary. Fred Lorz. The Olympic marathon runner, in a move straight out of a slapstick comedy, nearly pulled off a fraud that kind of makes us applaud him for his sheer audacity. The race in question was the marathon at the Olympic Games in St. Louis. Lorz was a bricklayer by day and not a particularly experienced long-distance runner, having earned a spot in the Olympics in a 5-mile race. Lorz decided to more easily bring home the gold when he hopped in a car at the 9-mile mark and just rode for the next 11 miles. He didn't even attempt to be discreet, instead waving to his fellow runners as he passed. Despite finishing first, Lorz didn't actually get the gold once it was pointed out that he had hitched a ride. It didn't seem to faze him, though, as he shrugged it off and said that he only did the whole thing as a joke. Donald Crowhurst. He attempted to compete in an around-the-world yacht race in a subpar boat. Upon realizing that continuing in the race would lead to almost certain drowning, he set up shop in South America and started radioing in updated positions that put him in the lead. Ultimately, Crowhurst found himself faced with a no-win situation. Either own up to being a big fat liar with a crappy boat, or disappear for as long as possible and hope people would forget about him. He chose the latter. After 3 months had passed, he radioed in that he was too far behind another sailor named Nigel Tetley, and was about to just give up and go home when he learned that Tetley's boat had sunk, meaning that Crowhurst was about to be the victor. Horrified by the fact that his competitor's boat had sunk and the realization that his fraudulence would soon be discovered, Crowhurst put a final cap in the tragic story when he threw himself overboard, his boat found 12 days after he had killed himself. Ali Dia. He and a friend concocted a scheme in which his buddy would phone up the folks at Southampton claiming to be famed soccer star George Weah, saying that he had a cousin named Ali Dia who was on the cusp of becoming a star in his own right. And the brilliant folks in the front office at Southampton bought the lie and offered Dia a contract solely on the word of some random guy they talked to on the phone. Dia was released shortly after his 120-minute appearance. Dora Ratjen. Here's an Olympian named Dora Ratjen. Dora was a high jumper who competed for Team Germany in the 1936 Olympic Games. Despite only finishing fourth, 2 years later she set a new women's world record in the high jump. As it turns out, that record would not stand for some pretty dramatic reasons. Dora Ratjen, as it happens, was really Horst Ratjen. So why did Horst compete as Dora? It had nothing to do with his gender identity. Rather, according to the man himself, he was forced into it by the Nazis, who weren't confident in their female athletes' abilities. Ratjen claims that they did not want embarrassment, so they recruited a guy and had him compete as a woman. The Spanish Paralympic team. During the 2000 Paralympic Games, Spain took a page from the ringer and sent entire teams of people who were not actually handicapped to compete. Most notable was the intellectual disabled men's basketball team that won the gold with a team full of people who had absolutely zero disabilities, and instead thought it would be a good idea to pick on the mentally handicapped. One member of the team came forward later and said that he and his teammates had no disabilities, and the same was true for numerous members of the Spanish Paralympic team. It's not a coincidence that, after the fallout of this scandal, Intellectual disabled basketball was eliminated from the Paralympics.